Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back finally getting around to doing a ranking I've been wanting to do for a while. Now, a while back, I did get around to finally doing my ranking of every Sasuke tournament. However, through the process of doing that, it did make me feel very nostalgic for Sasuke's sister series, that being Kunoichi, and here I'll be ranking every Kunoichi tournament. Which, this was a very strange rewatch. Now, straight up, this will be only including the 11 core tournaments of the show. I will not be including the 2 Kinnikumanzuke specials that happened that, again, aren't really even considered part of canon, though they do exist, and I've never watched them, nor do I really have any interest in it, considering it seems extremely sexist, considering most of the obstacles involve things related to being a housewife. But either way, we'll be ranking the 11 core Kunoichi tournaments. And this Kunoichi rewatch made me realize just how weird Kunoichi is as a series, where despite its connections to Sasuke, it has this very radically different tone. Unlike Sasuke, which is, for the most part, stayed a pretty consistent show in terms of its overall rules and structure, Kunoichi is a show that has really been all over the place. Again, not even including those Kinnikumanzuke specials. This is a show that consistently changes format every few seasons, feeling like it's in a completely different era of the show multiple times throughout its run. And obviously, it's had 2 different reboots at this point, both with radically different formats. And like, Kunoichi is just a series that I think just has so much potential, but never truly lives up to it, just due to the fact that it never really had the room to live up to it. It always had some growing pains, but once it started to figure itself out, it would usually get canceled immediately after it did so. And I feel like that's such a disappointing thing to realize when rewatching Kunoichi here, to where, like, while I do have a lot of nostalgia for certain Kunoichi tournaments, I do think it's made me realize that some of these tournaments are just simply not as good as I remembered them being. Again, like watching Sasuke once again, it really did fill me with joy rewatching a lot of these Sasuke tournaments that I loved as a kid. However, with Kunoichi, while it is the case with certain tournaments, I do feel like overall came out of this overall experience kind of being underwhelmed with Kunoichi. Not that it's entirely bad, but I just think in comparison to Sasuke, obviously I think Sasuke is the superior product. But either way, with that, let's start ranking the tournaments here. Again, 11 tournaments to rank. Let's start off at the bottom. At number 11, the worst Kunoichi tournament is one I actually used to like back in the day, despite all the criticism thrown at it and even my complaints with its overall format. I actually liked this tournament back in the day, but not anymore, and that is Kunoichi 8, which, I mean, this is kind of the black sheep of Kunoichi tournaments. I think this is one that is pretty widely regarded as the worst, and again, for a while, I was actually a defender of this tournament. Mind you, a lot of that is seeped in nostalgia and the fact that this is actually the only Kunoichi tournament I've ever watched live, and also this was the only Kunoichi tournament that aired essentially during the peak of my love of Sasuke. Again, around the Sasuke 23, 24 of the world, Kunoichi 8 is the only one that aired around that time. And again, this was a reboot of the series 2 years after its last season, and I really don't know what they were going for with this tournament. I mean, it in many ways feels more like a Sasuke Trials than an actual Kunoichi tournament. I mean, it obviously has a radically different format from the standard Sasuke formula of a person versus a course, and if they clear, they move on. Again, that's not the case with Kunoichi 8, where each stage here has this massive gimmick that, mixing that in with also the relative ease of the entire course, it does leave the season being very underwhelming. I mean, stage 1 is not the standard, again, person versus the course. It is instead 4 people running the same course at the same time, with only the top 2 moving on, which I will say on paper, I don't actually like completely hate. I feel like there's a way to make this work to a degree. I think the problem is the way that the groups were picked, to where, again, we get a situation specifically with Maho Tanaka, obviously probably the biggest name on the board for this season, being the last woman standing in the previous tournament, and she ends up being in a stacked group to where she gets 3rd place, getting eliminated in her heat. However, she still clears faster than most other people that end up clearing stage 1, so she ends up getting massively screwed over in that situation. I think instead it should have been more of a leaderboard situation, though even then that kind of like nullifies the point of having these heats of 4 people. But again, this is a really bad format, but one that I do think was actually like decent TV. I didn't hate watching this stage, and I feel like that's the one rectifiable thing of it, is that I still think it led to some interesting runs, especially with the swing and the difficulty of the landing on the raft. The hang move-esque obstacle was also kind of interesting to watch at points. Like, I do feel like this wasn't necessarily bad TV, but I do think the overall format is just really broken. Then you get stage 2, which on paper should be the best stage. I mean, it's a stage that comprises of a whole bunch of iconic Kunoichi obstacles. Yeah, I will be using the G4 names here, but again, you got like the super jump, the dancing stones, an easier version of Domino Hill, but you got the barrel roll, you got swing beams, again, all really strong obstacles. However, they're put on a course in a way that is disappointing in the sense that the time limit is ridiculous. It's 3.5 minutes, which really puts no urgency to any of these obstacles. And also, the overall field of competitors here feels extremely weak. Again, we get 35 people running this stage, and many of them fail obstacles that are typically in stage 1. Which, to add to that, I guess I should mention also the second chance round, which again, it's just really dumb also. Again, in these heats that had no one clearing, they allowed the people in those heats to play a second round where it's really them being spun around and the first to cross a bridge moves on, which is just really dumb in itself. But that led to a lot of people getting to stage 2 that really shouldn't have been there, and a lot of them end up failing the first obstacle, and again, that's all really bad. But then we get to stage 3, which doesn't even end up being a course, and instead is just a skills challenge of the flying roll, which is essentially just a trampoline jump above a pole, and 3 that make it the furthest move on to the final stage, which is extremely underwhelming. And again, what does this really have to do with the typical obstacle course structure? But then we get to the final stage, which is just a mess in the sense that it's so easy. You have a minute to climb what is essentially a ladder into a rock climb, to which all 3 of them clear. Mind you, one of them gets DQ'd due to touching the side, but we get 2 Kanzenseihas in this tournament, including Kotomi Sadoi, who clears with over 20 seconds left on the clock, which is insane. While this tournament does have a Kanzenseiha from Ryo Kamiya, who I used to love as a kid, it also doesn't feel like a real Kanzenseiha. It really feels like one that shouldn't have happened, especially in the fact that she barely clears this final stage. And again, a stage that Kodori clears with over 20 seconds left on the clock. Again, I really feel like the time limit on this stage should have been reduced by a significant amount, and also with the other wonky format changes here, again, it doesn't even feel like a real Kanzenseiha to me. So again, all of this stuff is just extremely wonky on this tournament. However, there are some notable moments here. We get the appearance of Asami Nagano, Makoto Nagano's wife, who gets to stage 2, mind you, through the second chance round, but still has a decent run there. We get Sarah Jean Underwood, who is a Playboy model that worked for G4 at a point. Like, again, she gets to stage 2 also, which is weird. And it's not an entirely bad tournament. I do like watching stage 1. While I did find stage 2 to be a lot slower, it does include a lot of iconic obstacles, but really just the end of the tournament's a complete mess, and really just as a whole, it just does not hold up on the rewatch, and because of that, I have it at the bottom here at number 11. Now, number 10, we're moving on to 2 tournaments in a row that are obviously very similar, both being very early tournaments, both having a very similar vibe to them, and we're starting it off at number 10 with Kunoichi 1, and what's there to say about this tournament? I mean, it is an extremely short one, only 45 minutes long. It is also one that is almost entirely just stage 1, considering only 2 people end up clearing, to which both of them end up failing the first obstacle in stage 2. I mean, in many ways, this, again, just shows a lot of growing pains for Kunoichi, and I think a lot of it, to be honest, comes from the fact that I just think the field of competitors is pretty weak here, because I actually feel like when looking at the course is not that difficult, where I think it's very jarring going from Kunoichi 1 and 2, and then jumping over to 3, where again, Kunoichi 1 and 2 only have 2 and 3 clears respectively on stage 1. Well, you have double-digit clears in Kunoichi 3. I think on paper you would think, oh, that's because Kunoichi 3's course is easier, but I really think it isn't. I think it simply comes from the fact that, again, I think Kunoichi 1 here just has a very weak field. Mind you, some of the obstacles here are pretty difficult. I mean, you got the dancing stones, which is always a difficult obstacle. The windmill cross is a different version than what we see later on, where this is 3 different windmills, all smaller. I assume it's more difficult, though still didn't seem super brutal here. Barrel roll is obviously the barrel roll. It's an iconic Kunoichi obstacle, probably the most difficult obstacle in stage 1. But then the rest of the course is like not that difficult. I mean, tornado run, pretty simple obstacle there. The triple hurdle, I mean, that is kind of difficult if you're rushing through it, though still not super brutal. And then you got the ladder climb at the end. I mean, like, it's not that difficult of a course. It's more so the fact that the field here is really weak, and I don't know if that's just because it was the first Kunoichi tournament and they didn't have that many applicants. But again, we get a lot of kids on this course, which is really weird. We get a lot of joke competitors. Like, I feel like we don't really get any serious contenders on this tournament, to where, again, the only people that clear here end up being Miho Yamada and Asami Yusa, 2 known figures before Kunoichi 1 here. And we do get someone like a Yoko Mori almost clearing here, and there's also someone that was like the first person to make it to the final obstacle that had like 24 seconds off the clock. Definitely enough time to clear, though really struggled at the very end. Like, there were a couple people here and there, that had potential, though it really just felt like this was overall a weak field, and mixing the weak field with the terrible results to me is what makes this not super interesting to watch, where it's not really like a Sasuke 19 situation. Or to me, what's so great about Sasuke 19 is that we have this strong field of competitors and they all still fail the course. This really difficult course, where this doesn't even feel like that difficult course, it just feels like the field of competitors is really weak. And again, to see them both fail the first obstacle in stage 2 is just super pathetic as well, especially considering it's an obstacle we see almost no fails on moving forward. Again, I just feel like this is just an overall really underwhelming tournament, and because of that, for me, it's here number 10. Now, number 9, again, very similar thing for Kunoichi 2. And again, it's just more of Kunoichi 1. I think the only thing that makes it slightly better is the fact that we have slightly better results. But it ends up being a stage 1 that is modified here, and they clearly try to make it easier. Again, you can tell they're learning their lesson from Kunoichi 1. In the fact that, again, they modified a windmill to make it easier. They do add 10 seconds to the clock. However, we still get terrible results. And a lot of that comes from the fact that we literally get 63 out of the 100 people here failing the first obstacle, which is just really lame, considering, again, we just see the same type of run over and over and over again here of everyone just failing the first obstacle, and that's not really interesting to watch. And again, it just feels like a relatively weak field. You do have some notable names. Again, you get the first appearance of Yuko Mizuno, you get Kazue Watanabe, both of which obviously make it to the final stage. You get the return of Masami Yusa and Miho Yamada, who cleared last time. You get Yoko Mori, who makes it far again, but that's about it. I mean, again, this is a pretty weak field of competitors here once again. And again, it really feels like that is the reason why we get terrible results here, or the fact that the course is actually hard. Though again, it is shocking to see all these people failing the first obstacle. You do also have the shock fail from Miho Yamada, who fails the barrel roll despite clearing it last time. So again, there are some good fails in stage 1. Stage 2, again, Masami Yusa fails the super jump again. It's what is she doing? But outside that, the other two people clear very easily, which is kind of underwhelming. And then we get to the final stage, which is very different from what we would see moving forward. Obviously, moving forward, we would see the tower formula that's used in Sasuke replicated. Here, instead, we do just get a massive bridge. That, to be fair, is pretty difficult. And considering the fact that, again, at this point, they weren't really trying to mirror Sasuke as much, and instead make a women's version of an obstacle course show, which focused a lot more on balance. It kind of makes sense that this is the final stage. Though here we see it pouring rain, and both Mizuno and Kazue don't even make it that far here. And again, that's kind of an underwhelming end as well. Again, to me, it's slightly better than Kunoichi 2 in the sense that we at least get these two people make it to the final stage. I feel like there's probably more notable runs as a whole, though. Again, seeing 63 people fail the first obstacle is pretty bad, but again, it's enough slightly to put it here above Kunoichi 1 and number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to the actual decent Kunoichi tournaments here, where for me, again, those bottom 3 were the bottom tier. We're now getting into at least average tournaments. However, this is a tournament that did severely underwhelm me on the rewatch here, one that simply is just not as good as all the other tournaments in my eyes, and that is Kunoichi 5. And Kunoichi 5 is a weird one for me, considering I feel like this is a tournament that I actually remember pretty well. It is one that I remember having a lot of nostalgia for, and the fact that, again, I was a big Kamiya Rihei fan, and she does very well here. She gets to the final stage. Obviously, this is also Ayako Miyake's second Kanzenseiha. However, that kind of brings up my issue with this tournament, and the fact that it is a renewal tournament. It is the tournament after Miyake's first Kanzenseiha. However, it really doesn't feel like it. There's almost no changes here, despite the fact that we just got a Kanzenseiha. I mean, literally stage 1, the only changes here are the fact that they swapped the placement of the balance bridge, where it's now before the barrel roll, which should have been in the first place. The angle run is now the double angle run, which doesn't do that much more damage. And we get a different type of hill obstacle before the zip line. That's literally it. And despite that, we get terrible results from stage 1, which again feels like more of a weak field of competitors sort of thing than the course actually being difficult, considering, again, just the previous tournament, we got more clears, despite the fact that the course here is not that different. And we literally don't even get a single clear until 72 when Rie Kamiya clears. So that's definitely an issue. But again, there are some notable runs along the way. I mean, we get Kaio Hagara timing out once again at the very end. We get the Higashis making their standard appearance on the season, with Rena making it pretty far in this one, failing the hop rocket. We get the appearance of Nagano's sister, which is weird, and she fails the hop rocket. We get Chie getting a pretty high number and shockingly failing the angle run. I mean, but outside of that, not many super notable fails, to where it feels like the bigger names that were shown here do clear. That in, again, Ryo Kamiya, we got Yuko Mizuno clearing for the last time. We get Sayaka Asami. We get, obviously, Ayako Miyake. We get a newcomer in Yuriko Imamura, who never appears again. We also get Mirabelle Aknu, who again is part of this trend in Kunoichi where they randomly invite these Olympians, and usually you have like one of them clear in a tournament, but then they never appear again, and Mirabelle Aknu is that person for Kunoichi 5. But Stage 2 ends up being pretty boring here. I mean, again, despite being a renewal, they end up actually making Stage 2 easier by making it have a longer time limit, but just adding in the hammer dodge, which is super easy, and also bringing back the hill climb from the triple hurdle, despite the triple hurdle actually doing damage the previous time, while the hill climb doesn't do anything. So again, I felt like that was really dumb. And everyone clears here except for Mirabelle Agnew, who fails the log. And we literally have Miyake clearing with 19 seconds on the clock, which is so dumb. But then we get Stage 3, which is fine. I mean, they do have 2 new obstacles here. Again, the Domino Hill obviously returns as you would expect, but we get a like fake cliffhanger, essentially, like mixing the cliffhanger and the narrow for the first obstacle, and then we get a really long balance beam, kind of like a shorter version of the final stage from Kunoichi 2, but with a time limit. And both of those obstacles do no damage here, where it ends up being the dominoes that take out the likes of Yuko Mizuno and Asami, who fails it for a 3rd time in a row here, which is pretty notable. Though Komiya and Miyake clear pretty easily. And again, final stage is pretty much exactly the same, just you have the shift between ladders, and Miyake clears with over 7 seconds left on the clock, which is still ridiculous. So again, like, I just feel like this is such a lackluster renewal tournament. I mean, it's just really bad. To where, like, on the rewatch, I felt like there was never any true doubt that Miyake was just going to Kansenseiha again, considering the course is exactly the same from the last time she Kansenseihaed. Though here we do get this notable ending to the season, where we do have the reveal that Miyake's grandmother had just died, and she dedicates this run to her, which again is a nice moment, but again, it's really just thrown in there at the last second. It would have been nice if they mentioned that before that. And again, considering how bad of a renewal tournament it is, for me, it's still towards the bottom here at number 8. Now, number 7, moving on to a tournament that is the first of this batch here, that being Kunoichi 9. Obviously, the first of the recent reboot tournaments. And Kunoichi 9 to me feels more so like a transitional season of Kunoichi, where it feels like it's a tournament that doesn't fully go all in on what Kunoichi's 10 and 11 would eventually do. It does have a course that's more so made to be more similar to Sasuke, but still doesn't fully commit to that necessarily. But again, like the other rebooted seasons, it is indoors. It is only 50 women. Though again, this one is only 3 stages. I think through that does come some of the issues here. Now, stage 1 is fine. I think stage 1 is solid enough. I mean, rolling hills, a decent first obstacle. Pipe hold, I mean, like, really this goes through all 3 seasons. Really hate it. Really gratuitous obstacle that's simply there to get these cleavage shots from the women, which is just terrible. But Fishbone's great obstacle. Obviously, it debuted in Kunoichi 9, so at least that's something. X Bridge is kind of lame. I'm really bad obstacle, and really terrible placement too after the fishbone. But you get the jump hang followed by the warp wall. Again, cool to see these obstacles in Kunoichi. And then you get the cannonball, which is a fine final obstacle. Again, like, it's a fine stage 1. I think it's a decent stage 1. However, I feel like the results of this stage 1 are largely underwhelming. I mean, one is the fact that we only get 2 notable figures from previous Kunoichi tournaments back here in Yuko Mizuno and Mika Izumi. And it would have been cool to see more people. And I feel like with most of this batch of people being brand new, it kind of makes a lot of the tournament like not super interesting to me. Again, without a lot of the history of the series being represented here, I felt like that was kind of underwhelming. Which, to be fair, again, it had been 10 years since the last proper Kunoichi tournament, because again, who cares about Kunoichi 8? So I get it, but still, it definitely does leave the casting of it a bit lacking. That, again, I think is rectified by 10 and 11, because you have the history of what happened on 9 to benefit those, while in 9 you don't really have much history of anyone, really. But mixing out the fact that, again, the results are pretty bad here for most of it. I mean, we don't get it clear until 42, and 42 out of 50, though along the way we do get some decent runs here. I mean, Sakai Ayaka gets all the way to the cannonball and times out. Mika Izumi, the same thing. I mean, you got Okabe having her only stage 1 fail at the warp wall. Yeah, a lot of fishbone fails here, which obviously you would expect. But I think this is all really strange considering the fact that, and like, the time limit here is extremely high. I mean, the time limit for this course is 2 minutes and 20 seconds, which is ridiculously high. And we do later see people clear with ridiculous times on the clock. I mean, we get Hikaru Izumi clearing with 36 seconds. We get Ayano clearing with almost 50 seconds left on the clock. Like, that is ridiculous. Yet we're seeing a lot of timeouts as well. And it is weird to see that we get 5 stage 1 clears. However, all those people are within the last 9 people to run the course. So I felt like that was kind of just weird pacing wise. And I really did not love stage 2 here, where stage 2 ends up having no time limit. But despite that, they still make the course as if it does have one, where again, like, we get the start of this course having obstacles like the slide walk, the spider walk, the conveyor, these obstacles that are simply not interesting without a time limit. Again, the slide walk is literally a completely pointless obstacle if you don't have the time limit involved. Conveyor, same thing. I mean, I guess it tires you out, but still, like, not super interesting to watch without a time limit. The slant edge is a really boring obstacle. And while the end of the course is decent with the sponge bridge, cliffhanger, even though that's, again, kind of lame, where, again, it's an extremely easy version of it. This one having no gaps at all, and also the ledge is thicker, which, again, obviously you got to tone it down a bit, but I think this is just a bit overboard. And you get the waiver bridge, which is just the pendulum bridge renamed, and it's fine. Again, like, kind of lame stage 2, and everyone that we see make it to stage 2 here ends up failing the sponge bridge, except for Izumi, who makes it to the final stage only to time out at the end. Again, like, really, I do find a lot of the results of this tournament just be kind of lame. Now, I will say, and we will see this later in the list, that I actually do really like this revival of Kunoichi. I do like what they eventually do with Kunoichi's 10 and 11. However, I do feel like 9 was not quite there yet. And I think mixing in with the fact that I have issues with the course and overall pacing of the tournament, for me, does leave it here at number 9. Now, number 6, we're moving on to KUNOICHI Tournament that I remembered loving back when I was a kid. Like, if you asked me before I did this rewatch, I assumed that this would have been like number 2 on this list here. However, I did not enjoy it as much on the rewatch, and that ends up being KUNOICHI 6. And again, I used to like KUNOICHI 6. It's a tournament that I remember pretty fondly due to it being a decent renewal tournament. I mean, while it's still like not super difficult, it ends up feeling like a decent renewal tournament on paper. It has this like international theme that for some reason I remembered. Like, it had these notable things about it. However, I think on the rewatch, I kind of realized like all of that is kind of for naught. Where, yes, it does have a decent renewal. It has a brand new stage 1. However, it's also still a very easy stage 1. Where we still get 11 clears here, and really none of these obstacles outside the flying pillar end up being super notable obstacles. I mean, you get float run as the starting obstacle, which is kind of lame. The prison tilt is brought in for the second obstacle. I mean, you get like the falling pole, which is literally them just sliding down a pole, which is boring. Again, this is not that good of a stage 1 in retrospect. And while we do get some decent fails here from the likes of like Yokomori failing the flying pillar, we get Chie failing the barrel roll, we get Nagano's sister failing the first obstacle, which was funny, we get Mizuno failing the balance bridge. Like, there are some notable fails here, but really outside that, I felt like this is just kind of a lame stage 1. And actually, I feel like the international theme, like, while it is something that made me remember this season, I think in retrospect, it's actually a terrible aspect of this season. To where I feel like so much of this tournament ends up revolving around this international theme, particularly in stage 1, obviously, because almost none of them make it to stage 2. And that's the thing, is that stage 1 is like so focused on these international figures, all of which that don't do that well. And it ends up neglecting a lot of these people that make it further into the tournament. Also ends up neglecting some figures that had done well in the past. Like, Kamiya Rie is completely skipped in this tournament, despite having been there. Same thing goes for like a Haga. Like, there are people that were here that were just simply skipped over in favor of all these internationals being shown that don't do well. But again, there are some notable runs here. I mean, like, Ren Higashi clears, youngest person to clear at 13. We get Okamoto's first appearance, who is Shingo's protege, and she clears. We get Aaron Jessica Dalty, the only non-Japanese person to make it through stage 1. Obviously, Miyake clears stage 1. Like, we obviously get the first clear from Maho Tanake, but like outside that, it's a lot of no-names that make it through stage 1. A lot of people that don't appear again or never have a good run ever again. People that don't really have that much of an impact on the overall show. Then we get to stage 2, which is just a complete mess. Like, I really hate this stage 2. And the fact that it's a stage 2 that is almost entirely unfailable. Where, I mean, we do have someone failing the super jump. However, outside that, really the only other failable obstacle is the swinging beams, the final obstacle, which is a great final obstacle. But even then, we add in the aspect of that this is a time trial. They changed the rules here for stage 2 to where only the top 6 times end up moving on. So despite having 8 clears here, 2 of those people don't move on, which is, again, extremely lame. Mind you, to be fair, the time limit was probably too high as is, though I don't get why they just didn't do a normal stage here and just reduce the time limit. But again, like obstacles like the 2-pole bridge and net climb are just kind of boring. The hurdles are also really boring. Like the course is just genuinely like a boring course. So again, stage 2 did not age well in my eyes. However, I do think stage 3 is solid here. I do like the peg jump. I think it's actually a really fun obstacle, and we do see both Rena and Aaron fail there. We actually get a pendulum bridge fail, which is pretty fun. Again, something we don't ever see outside this, but it was interesting to see someone fail the very final obstacle of this version of Kunoichi's final stage. But we do have Maho and Miyake clearing stage 3, and Maho has like a pretty pathetic performance, not even getting to the pole, but Miyake has Shinkanseiya again. But this one feels a bit more earned. Again, like unlike Kunoichi 5, where it just felt like kind of gifted in the sense that it was just such an easy course for her, this actually felt like one that she actually had to try. Again, like she clears the final stage with a fraction of a second left on the clock. It actually felt like a genuine test of her abilities. So again, at least that felt like a more satisfying conclusion. But really as a whole, again, like I just found this tournament really underwhelming on the rewatch. One that its stage 1 wasn't as good as I remembered. Its stage 2 is actually just kind of bad. And while stages 3 and 4 are actually kind of solid, to me it's not enough to place it any higher here than number 6. Now number 5, we're moving on to a tournament that, and from 5 on, I think these are all like pretty good tournaments. I think these are solid to where I have more pros than cons. But at number 5, here we do have Kunoichi 4. Obviously Miyake's first Kansenseiha tournament. And again, this is just a solid tournament all around. And it feels like a continuation off of Kunoichi 3, but not as good in the fact that I think we get less notable moments throughout it. Still a solid tournament all around. And we do get a redesigned stage 1 that is mostly made more difficult. I mean, we get a spring added to the dancing stones. We get the new balance bridge, which is a harder version of the one that was before. We get the new hop rocket, which doesn't have the pedestal, and that ends up doing a decent amount of damage here. Though we do also get a weird like hill climb into a zip line, which is really boring. And they for some reason just keep that for Kunoichi 5, which is really weird. But again, there's some pros, there's some cons of stage 1 here. But I thought the results of stage 1 here were pretty interesting. I mean, there were some really shocking fails throughout all of stage 1. I mean, we get Kaiohaga timing out in stage 1 for the second time here in a row. We get Tomomi, who is a finalist since Kunoichi 3, who shockingly gets number 47, by the way, but she ends up timing out as she hits the button, which is a shocking fail. We get Masami Yusa, who again had a shock early fail in Kunoichi 3. However, you would think she would make a comeback here, only then fail the second obstacle. We get Chie failing the hop rocket. We get a shocking Mizuno fail of, again, she almost achieved Kansenseiha in the previous tournament. Here she fails the very first obstacle. So again, there are a lot of shocking fails in stage 1. And even then we get some decent clears as well. Again, like obviously this has the run of Miyake, who comes out of nowhere to achieve Kansenseiha in her first ever appearance. And while as a whole, I do feel like that's a little bit underwhelming, in the sense that, again, like I feel like something I love so much about Sasuke is these storied competitors that build their way up to Kansenseiha. I feel like Miyake just doing it in one try is not as interesting as, again, the likes of like Inagano, Rushihara, Morimoto, who had these longer stories, but it still ends up being this big shock here that kind of adds to the appeal of this, especially considering it's like the first time it happened. Though we do get like Kazui Watanabe clearing, we get Miho Yamada coming back to clear, we got Sami clearing, Mika Izumi clearing. So again, there are some notable figures moving on, and we got Owana Ban, who is the typical Olympian that makes it through stage 1 in this tournament. We also got Saori Yoshida, who ends up being a big focus on this tournament. That is really strange, considering, again, like this is the first time I actually watched the original Japanese version of Kunoichi 4, and coming from the G4 version, like Yoshida just felt like a normal competitor that was just there. However, she ends up being a major focus here, like being the main go-to person for reaction shots and everything, considering I believe she had just been at the Olympics and she was kind of a big deal at that point, but still really weird seeing this for the first time. But in stage 2 here actually ends up being kind of solid too, where despite it not being super difficult here, I mean, all they did is change the hill climb into the hurdles. Like the hurdles actually ends up taking out Miko Izumi, which ends up being a big shocking fail there. And we do get Owana Ban timing out along the way, though everyone else ends up clearing here. However, I feel like stage 3 here is kind of where, for me, it kind of gets a bit slower in the sense that it's literally everyone failing the dominoes except for Miyake, who ends up achieving Kansenseiha. Again, that's kind of underwhelming to a degree. Though again, as a whole, I think this is a solid tournament. I think it's one that has a, again, shocking stage 1. Again, a lot of shocking fails there. You get a solid stage 2 where, again, while it is mostly mundane with a lot of clears, you do at least get the Mika Izumi fail. Then you just get the shock factor of Miyake getting Kansenseiha. So for me, I think this is a solid tournament all around. Despite the fact there are minor blemishes here and there, it's enough for it to be here number 5. Now number 4, and here we're jumping forward all the way to one of the most recent tournaments. Here we do have Kunoichi 10. And again, straight up, I really like the renewal of Kunoichi. I do think it does something really interesting from a fan of Sasuke in the sense that it very much gives me old school Sasuke vibes, where while I think that can be a bit underwhelming from how Kunoichi was approached before this, where again, Kunoichi is a series that, as I mentioned, it tried to make it into its own thing. It kind of tried to make it into its own balanced, focused obstacle course. The recent Kunoichi tournaments don't do that. Instead, they try to make Kunoichi into Sasuke light. And I feel like that actually ends up bringing this interesting dynamic to the show to me. I mean, we get like the double pendulum being brought to stage 1 here, which I thought was an interesting addition, though it ends up being extremely brutal in this tournament, where only 6 people end up clearing it. All 6 of those people end up being the people that clear stage 1. But that leads to some shocking fails, particularly Ayano's fail. But then you also get like Yuka Mizuno, who fails it in a really strange way, where she like grabs the bar, holds onto it, but then tries to readjust her grip midway through and loses her grip there. But beyond that, I mean, you get some solid clears. I mean, you get Reika Saiki, the muscle idol, who had a shocking fail in Kunoichi 9. She ends up barely clearing here, so that's a riveting run, and especially considering it's so early on in the tournament. You get Mika Izumi clearing after timing out the very end last time, and that was great to see her back. You get Okabe clearing after also having a close call last time. You get Aya coming out of nowhere and clearing here, being the only newbie to clear in this course. You get Kano Watanabe and Hikari Izumi, who were 2 of the best runs last time, also clearing here. Like, I thought we got a pretty solid stage 1. And we get the introduction of stage 2, a stage 2 that, again, like from this point forward is what really ends up making me love this tournament, in the fact that we essentially get old school Sasuke courses. Stage 2 here is essentially Sasuke 4 stage 2, but with the addition of the slide walk at the beginning. You get slide walk into spider walk, into hammer dodge, into reverse conveyor, into wall lifting. That's essentially the Sasuke 1 through 4 stage 2. And also we see the slide walk being the only, like, again, not retro obstacle of the bunch, but that one does a lot of damage here, and we see Reika failing there, timing out, and we see Mika Izumi and Okabe both timing out, some of that having to do with the time that they lost at the slide walk. So I thought that all brought a very interesting dynamic to this. Oh, and then we have like Aya barely clearing, and then we have Watanabe and Hikari moving on, including Hikari's like notable moment of her just like simply skipping over the skywalk, which was funny. But then we get a stage 3 that is essentially Sasuke 4 stage 3, where we see the return of the propeller bar, the arm bike. We get the sponge bridge back, which again keeps the Kunoichi feel to it. Again, we get a dumbed down cliffhanger, which I still don't love. I also find it weird they like bother to try to make it more similar to like the Sasuke 5 through 8 cliffhanger, but then also like don't. So it's like, what's the point? But then we get the pipe slider, which I think the pipe slider is really fun to see here. I love seeing the pipe slider in Kunoichi here, and that's where the tournament ends here. We see both Watanabe and Hikari failing the final jump on the pipe slider. Again, I think those are all really fun runs. I think this is a pretty solid tournament. Again, I really have no like major flaw with this tournament. I actually really enjoyed my entire experience with it. To me, it's just that the other tournaments are better, with more notable results as a whole, though I do think, again, with this starting this trend to be more in line with old school Sasuke, it did definitely stick out in my mind, and that's why it's here number 4. Now number 3, and guess what? It's the next tournament, the most recent Kunoichi tournament at this point, and that is Kunoichi 11, which again, sad that we didn't continue off of this, but again, I thought Kunoichi's revival here was just getting better every time. Now, I think the most underwhelming aspect of Kunoichi 11 is the fact that the 2 biggest names for Kunoichi 10 are not back. Kano Watanabe and Hikari Izumi were missing from this tournament, both due to other obligations, which again sucks. It sucks to see 2 of the biggest names not here. However, despite that, we still get great results. We get a lot of smaller names from previous 2 tournaments doing well here, and we get a good chunk of stage 1 clears. I mean, we get 10 stage 1 clears, which was cool to see on this style of course. I mean, we essentially get the exact same stage 1, but they swap out the double pendulum for the dragon glider, a really nerf version of the dragon glider where it's only the first railing, which initially I really didn't like, and I still stand by the fact that I do like the double pendulum more. However, I do think the more the course went on, I did kind of like the way this dragon glider was utilized, and where really it was more so about keeping your grip throughout the dip than it was about the actual jump, though some people even failed that as well. And again, the dragon glider here is easier than double pendulum, but it still did a decent amount of damage. I mean, we do still see Yuka Mizuno failing here, this time failing to jump to it. We get the appearance of Daisuke Masada's daughter, which was funny to me, and she fails the dragon glider. We get Karen, which automatically makes this tournament better, and she makes the dragon glider. We get the shocking fail of Aya, who was given 50 in this tournament, only for her to fail the fishbone. But also, again, we get a lot of notable stage 1 clears. A lot of these people being people that have been competing in the last few tournaments, but just never had their breakout until here. And we got Ayaka Sakai, who had a close call in Kunoichi 9. She finally clears here. We get Asahina Aya, who also had been failing the fishbone last 2 tournaments, but here she finally clears. We get Ayano's resurgence and her finally clearing again. We get Reika and Mika Watanabe making it back to stage 2. We get Okabe making it back to stage 2. Like, there are a decent amount of notable clears here. And stage 2 is actually pretty fun too. Again, it's the exact same course with 5 extra seconds, which I will say I didn't like that nerfing of it, but still ends up doing a lot of damage here. We still get a lot of timeouts here. And even beyond that, we get a couple spider walk fails from Reika and Asahina, which I thought were fun to watch. We get to see Okabe just decimate stage 2, clearing with like 22 seconds left on the clock, despite the fact that she timed out last time, so I thought that was great to see. Ayano makes it to stage 3, and great moments there, and I thought stage 3 was pretty solid. I mean, we swap out the cliffhanger for the plant bridge, which I don't love that change. I mean, realistically, I would have just liked them to get a good cliffhanger and replace the plant bridge with the arm bike, but what are you going to do? Still led to decent results here. I mean, we get 2 pipe slider fails, including Ayano's, which is just a really great moment there. I mean, the fact that she has this like Yamada style fail of her landing on the platform and then falling backwards is a super notable fail there. And we get Okabe just coming out of nowhere to make the final stage, which I thought was a great moment. Or again, she's someone that demonstrated a lot of potential in Kunoichi 9 and 10, but never someone I expected to actually make it to the final stage. Like, I thought that was a great moment. And she does come relatively close to Kanzen Seiha. I mean, she had a decent pace up to the rope, but then she just like really struggles with the transition. Again, it really felt like she was kind of close to it. So again, like, I felt like overall, I thought this was a great tournament. I thought there were great results here. And while yes, it is underwhelming that 2 of the biggest names from the previous 2 tournaments are not here, I felt like there were enough people here that did well to make up for that. And I just had a really fun time watching this tournament, and because of that, for me, it's here number 3. Now number 2, and again, the top 2 here are the 2 seasons that are the most iconic to me. I think these are the 2 tournaments that probably have the most amount of big moments to me. And the order did switch around for me quite a bit. However, I did end up landing with, at number 2, with Kunoichi 3. And Kunoichi 3 is a very important season to Kunoichi, at least within the 3 to 7 era, where I think this is the first time that they actually kind of found their footing. Again, Kunoichi's 1 and 2 were a bit of a mess, which is a very weak field and also just kind of weird course design. This is the first time they actually try to make it a bit more in line with Sasuke, in the fact that, again, we do get a 4-stage course finally, and we do get a Final 4, and we do also get a final stage tower. But also, this is the first tournament that actually has decent results. I mean, stage 1 is just infinitely better from the previous tournaments, where we do get 14 stage 1 clears, including one almost right away from Momo Nakanishi, who has a fun one to watch. Again, seeing someone clear at the very beginning of this tournament when we didn't have anyone clear in those previous tournaments until the tail end is pretty funny. And we get another clear at 13, to where then we don't have another clear until 70, which is just really weird. And we still get some notable runs along the way. I mean, we get Kayohaga timing out the top of the ladder for the first time. We get Masami Yusa's shocking fail at her failing the dancing stones, despite never having issues there before, and her obviously making the stage 2 the previous 2 tournaments. We get Rena Higashi's first appearance, with her only being 10 years old at this point, and her getting all the way to the angle run, failing at the very end there. And we have some really notable clears. I mean, we get Chi Nishimura, the only woman to clear stage 1 in Sasuke up to that point, and she ends up getting her first appearance at Kunoichi and clear stage 1. We get Saki Suzuki, a 13-year-old who clears stage 1. We get the first appearance of Asami. We get Yokomori finally clearing stage 1. We get the first appearance of Izumi, who clears. Yuka Mizuno clears. Kazui Watanabe clears, but gets completely skipped over because they just, for some reason, don't like Kazui Watanabe. But again, decent stage 1 here. Stage 2, again, a bit hit or miss. I mean, it is the stage 2 format that we will see for the next 3 tournaments, of super jump into hill climb to spinning bridge and floating bridge in a 40-second time period, which I do like the extremely short time limit here, though it is also a very quick course, and really most people end up clearing here without much difficulty. But then we get to stage 3, which again has some notable results here. Again, Chi Nishimura falling off the course at the Super Vault, that's a big shock. We get a lot of domino fails, as you would expect, but we also get 3 clears at the very end with Izumi, Tomomi, and Mizuno, which gives us this big epic showdown at the end, where both Izumi and Mizuno come very close. Obviously, Mizuno having the iconic moment of her literally hitting the buzzer 0.2 seconds late, being being in line with this Nagano from Sasuke 12 moment, which, to be fair, this actually happened right before that, which also, like, I think in general, like, Kunoichi 3, like, in most ways reminds me of Sasuke 12. I think that is the way I look at this tournament at this point, where it is structured very similarly, where stage 1 is good, with a lot of success on stage 1. I do think what makes it better on Kunoichi here than Sasuke is the fact that this was, like, kind of unprecedented for Kunoichi at this point, where, like, on Sasuke 12 was, like, kind of a bit more boring considering it was kind of more expected. So I think that's kind of a pro for Kunoichi here. But then stage 2, again, kind of just meh with a lot of clears. Stage 3 has some success with 3 people make it to the final stage. And then we get the final stage of, again, one person coming so close to winning. So again, like, very similar to Sasuke 12 in my eyes, but with obviously less tournaments. It ends up being higher on its respective list than Sasuke 12 is on my Sasuke list, and that's why Kunoichi 3 here is number 2. Now, number 1, the best Kunoichi tournament in my eyes, does come from a tournament that I feel like is weird to have at number 1, just due to the fact that there are some underwhelming elements of it. However, when I think of my favorite Kunoichi tournament, it does end up being Kunoichi 7, which is strangely the final tournament of the original format, which also is just extremely underwhelming that it is the case. Considering, again, I thought this was really great. We get a brutal stage 1. Finally, a true renewal that actually does a lot of damage, where we get a new first obstacle in the lily pads, again, kind of like Kunoichi's version of these steps. We get the most brutal combination in Kunoichi history, probably, in the log jam into flying pillar, which I just love this combination at the time, where we had the log jam in itself doing a lot of damage, but when also mixing it in with the fact that you have to do it quickly to catch up to the flying pillar. I absolutely adored this combination of obstacles, which is something that definitely stands out from this tournament to me. But then you also get this really brutal version of the hop rocket, one that the only people that end up clearing it are the people that end up clearing the stage, with only 4 people clearing stage 1 here. And it ends up being a strange obstacle in the fact that, like, the obstacle kind of tricks you into using the trampoline, when actually the way to clear the obstacle is by not even bothering to use the trampoline. But I always found that to be kind of a funny obstacle. But again, we get so many notable fails here. I mean, stage 1 is just a slaughter, but not because the field of competitors is weak here. We actually get a pretty strong field of competitors. It's just the fact that stage 1 is actually brutal. I mean, the logjam takes down so many notable figures. I mean, you got Hagakayo, you got Okamoto failing there, you have Yokomori failing there. The hop rocket does a lot of damage, where Rene Higashi fails there. You get Yuka Mizuno failing there. You have the All-Stars bringing proteges to the course, all of them failing stage 1. I mean, stage 1 is just a complete slaughter, and again, in a way that feels warranted. And I feel like that was definitely refreshing, especially after these last renewal tournaments where they just didn't feel like full renewals. And we do see 4 people clear stage 1, all being notable names. We get Komiya Rie clearing stage 1 after not in Kunoichi 6 and not even being shown. And Nishimura finally clearing stage 1 for the first time since Kunoichi 3. We get the 2 finalists, Maho Tanaka and Ayako Miyake, clearing stage 1. Again, I thought those were all really fun clears, but then that brings us to stage 2, which I think is the best stage 2 Kunoichi has ever had. I mean, Kunoichi, I think, is a show that really struggles with stage 2, where I think within the OG seasons of 1 through 7, I think stage 2 is typically the worst part of those tournaments. However, Kunoichi 7 has an all-time great stage 2. I think this is actually the best part of the entire tournament, where you actually get a pretty brutal stage 2, one that has an extremely tough time limit, but also one that has a pretty solid mixing of obstacles. You get the super jump into dancing stones, followed by a spinning log, and then the swing ladder, and then the swing beams, like all pretty solid obstacles. And again, we get Rie having this shocking fail to swing ladder after missing the dismount. We get Maho clearing, making you think that, okay, maybe this course isn't that bad. But then we follow that with Chie timing out as she dashes for the button. That's a shocking fail. And we obviously get the most shocking fail of them all. We got Miyake failing the swing beam, an obstacle she had cleared in the previous tournament, but also being her first and only fail ever. So again, stages 1 and 2 of this tournament are truly elite. My biggest reservation with this is how bad stage 3 is. One, in the fact that we only get Maho Tanaka there, obviously, but even beyond that, the result here ends up being extremely underwhelming, where we do get a redesigned stage 3, one that the Domino Hill was redesigned, where Red Zone now ends up having rounded platforms instead of the normal dominoes. And then you also get the introduction of the Magic Wall, this rock climbing obstacle that, considering Maho's struggle with rock climbing in Kunoichi 6, again, that felt like this potential great storyline for Maho Tanaka, but then she just fails the dominoes unceremoniously before even getting to the modified version of it, meaning that we never even get to see these modifications here in action. Plus, also, again, like, it takes away this great storyline of her potentially filling the rock wall again. So again, I feel like the ending to this tournament is very underwhelming, and that's my one big knock for a tournament. However, I think stages 1 and 2 are just truly elite. and are probably the best that Kunoichi has ever been. And for me, that is enough to still land Kunoichi 7 here as my favorite Kunoichi tournament, here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every Kunoichi tournament. Again, fun to revisit these years later. All these I haven't watched in probably 10 plus years at this point. And straight up, the revival tournaments, I realized through rewatching this, I don't think I've ever watched any of them in full. I've watched runs here and there, but this is my first ever true experience with them. So again, like, this was a fun experience here. Now I've done Sasuke and Kunoichi. I would ideally like to do a video on Viking at some point. I think maybe that would be fun, though I don't know exactly how I would structure it. Also, just in general, I would like to do more Sasuke related videos, but don't know when those will come. But still happy to finally get this one out. But with that, that is the video. Thank you for watching.